Aloha, I'm Ross Stevenson with the Hawaiian Railway Society. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about the outer islands from Oahu. We tend to be, because I guess we originally had a very centralized government, we still do in a lot of ways, be too Oahu-centric sometimes. And what I wanted to do was talk about railroad heritages on the outer islands, starting with the largest railway project on the outer islands, which went between basically along Hamakua and into Puna on the Big Island. When I talk about Oahu-centric, I'll show you the first picture that we have today. This is an ad for the Volcano Stables from the City Directory in 1902. And they're advertising the use of their wagon tours, but behind it is a drawing of the Judiciary Building on Oahu. So, like I say, we want to try and blow the trumpet a little bit more for the outside islands. On the left of this page, you see it says the Hilo Railroad Company. And what happened, the same man who set up the Oahu Railway and Land Company, which is Benjamin Franklin Dillingham, who got his first railroad authorization from King Kalākaua in 1889. In 1899, he wanted to do the same thing. He wanted to replicate the success of the ORNL on the Big Island. And what he did is he started buying land out in Puna and that area, and bought a lot of land actually. And he started what was called the Hilo Railroad Company. Ultimately, in its first stage, it had several different sections going to plantations in the Puna general area. Also, it, by the way, carried wood from a lumbering business in Puna. It had the Puna line, the Ola'a line, and the Volcano line. What happened is this went through to Glenwood and was about 7 miles from the volcano. They would organize tours, to go on the train to the end of the line, and then they would haul them by wagon to the volcano house, and they would have, as part of the program, give them overnight stay and food and all at the volcano house. So you had a section of line that went through Puna initially, and if you look at the next slide we have here, these are the routes that the Hilo Railway Company had initially. There on the left you can see the Puna area. They have several lines that went off the main line. The main line that you see down there now is nowhere near the highway that we drive on now. But it went through both lava fields and into the good soil in Puna. And, excuse me, they also had it go, as you can see in the left center, pretty close to up to Kilauea Volcano, and they expected to extend it. Now, excuse me, what happened is that Dillingham wanted to extend this connection with sugar plantations all the way up to the Hamakua coast on the right. Unfortunately for him, that area on the right is extremely hilly and gully infested, I guess you could call it. And so he spent a huge amount of money putting this together. His railroad ended up being bankrupted by the cost of this. And you have a section there on the upper right saying proposed line to Honoka'a. It never got to Honoka'a, ironically. It only got as far as Puelo in 1913. and which was ironic because the land between Puʻilo and Honoka'a is really benign compared to the topography of the area between Hilo and Puʻilo. So anyway, his project went bankrupt, and he ended up going through bankruptcy court, and the railway was redone as the Hawaii Consolidated Railway. This was a really large project. Now, a man named Wilder earlier had, in the 1870s, had built a railroad from Māhukona up to Kohala, and it hoped to build a railroad connection down the Hamakua coast to Hilo. So a lot of the planning, that initial surveying for what became the Hilo Railway and Hawaii Consolidated Railway, was done by Wilder. The next slide I'd like to show you, this is the Hawaii Consolidated Railway Limited base yard, 1942. Basically, on the east side of Hilo Town, you can see what's called Kamehameha Avenue today up there on the top. A lot of this area is now occupied by the county parks. They have the center that the annual annual Kula festivals are held over there, roughly the top center of that triangle. Excuse me. If you look on the bottom right center, you'll see a circle. They had a roundhouse there and a turntable. The turntable is gone. The roundhouse is still there. It's just kind of been neglected. But you had various lines. You had on the left would go up to along the coast, Makai of what's now Kamehameha Avenue, which was called Front Street in those days, which would go to Hamakua. On the top right, you had the way up toward the airport. On the bottom right, you had to Ola'a and Glenwood. And then you also had, those of you who are into Hawaiian building history, on that lower left arrow, it would go to a factory that was building what was called kanik. Kanik was often used for ceilings and all like that. It was a product from sugarcane bagasse, and it basically was like a very light plywood, and when painted and all, it gave an attractive surface. So for a long time, a lot of the houses throughout the islands would have kanik ceilings made at that plant. Now, we mentioned in Waiakea that there was a roundhouse. This is the roundhouse and turntable when they had the turntable and had engines in the facility. It's been used mostly for storage, and there are a couple of vehicles from time to time in there now. It's only about half a circle in circumference. Now, the next slide we have here is, it shows gives you an idea of the plantations, sizes of their own plantation railroads, which were connected to the Hawaiian Consolidated Railway. This is just like on Oahu, where the railway would bring passengers and finished goods to the plantations, and the plantations would use the railroad to bring their sugar products ultimately to the Hilo wharf. You can see Puʻilo, for example, had 5 engines, 16 miles of track, and we also a regular track, and it had what we talked about, a portable track, which was lightweight track that could be snapped together to go out into the individual fields. Keiau had 10 miles of portable track, and it had, had 35.5 miles of regular track. So you can see this was a big investment. 550 cars, 6 engines. Again, the Hawaii Consolidated Railway did a lot of freight business. It was not so much a passenger service, but the spectacular scenery of the Hamakua section, the division, would end up bringing it in a certain amount of tourist dollars, even in the 20s. The next picture, this is 1943. It's engine 99 at the Waiakea Yard. Again, you had that map previously. You can see these are the larger kind of engines than the Plantations had. You can see the water tower in the back. You can see the bringing, you got a fuel tanker over there in the back. So this was a regular railroad that was a lifesaver and a lifeline for the Big Island's east side. Now, when Dillingham decided to go ahead and build the Hamakua branch, he, as we said, he faced a lot of different physical obstacles, but one of the obstacles that he faced too was, where is the ultimate main harbor going to be for the Big Island? Now, Dillingham wanted it in Hilo. This argument happened all over the place. It happened on Kauai and Lihue. It happened in Maui. Where is the main harbor going to be? Now, most of us know today the main harbor for heavy goods on the Big Island isn't Hilo, it's Kauai High. But at this time, Hilo was that. And what happened is, you got to remember, Hilo is a broad bay. And it can then, because the prevailing winds push waves into the coast along the east side, it can get rough. So what they did was, at the turn of the century, is they went ahead and used a geological formation in Hilo Bay called Blonde Reef. It was named after the ship of Lord Byron, who was over in Hilo in the 19th century, but it extends over most of the eastern portion of Hilo Bay from north of Coconut Island and then toward Wainaku. So what the territory did, they said, okay, you can go ahead and build a railroad. We'll give you the right to condemn land and all like that to build your railroad. But we want you to build a breakwater to help develop Hilo Bay as a harbor. So Dillingham was forced, interests were forced to put the money out for that, and it's still there. It's been repaired because of a few tsunamis, but if you look at this particular photograph, aerial photograph from today, you can see that about 2/3 of the size of the area of the bay's front is protected by the Hilo breakwater. It starts over there on the bottom right and extends out and then curves over toward Wainaku. And that's part of the heritage of the railroad, because they built that as part of their agreement to go into Hamakua. Now, the next photograph I want to show you is how expensive and difficult it was to build the Hamakua branch of the Hawaii Consolidated Railway. You can see the number of steel bridges. At that time, steel was something that they were using in bridges across the islands. Ultimately, they got replaced by concrete. You can see the length of the bridges in feet on this area he built, 6,600 feet. Weight of the bridges, 5,600 tons. Number of steel, wooden trestles, 29, not so much. Length of 5,109, that's almost a mile. And on the bottom, number of tunnels of approximately 3,100 feet in length, 3 of them. So this was a huge undertaking. The largest tunnel, you can still see the entrance to it in the Maulua Gulch. It's on the Hilo side. It looks like a small Arc de Triomphe. It's easy to spot. And we'll show you a picture of that coming up. Now, the construction costs, as we mentioned in Māhukona for the railway, in this next slide, you can see the kind of cuts that they had to put in. That bridge is a flume to either bring water down from above, or more likely to bring cane down to the mill below. And so you had most of this initially was done with pick and shovel, but ultimately too they did use some heavier equipment. But these are gigantic cuts. Now, another heritage thing from the railroad is as much of the current Mamalohoa Highway in Māhukona follows the railroad track. Now, trains cannot turn very fast, and trains do not like heavy grades as much as automobiles do. So what you had was a straight series, or mostly straight series of paths for the railroad, and when they built the roadway in the 50s, they went ahead and used much of these cuts and just doubled the width or tripled the width of them. So you're in many places following the railroad line. Now the next photograph here, this is the earliest rail line engine. It was called the Kilauea. It shows you the technology of the time. It burned wood, not coal, it burned wood. But you can see the size of this engine compared to the ones that you see, say, Fowler engines on the plantations. This is a strong, strong horse. And again, the cost of building, here's another photograph. This is a Kilauea engine that you just saw. After 1913, it's going over Lapahoihoi Gulch. And you can see the kind of steel work that had to be done on the bridges in those days, and the cut on the cliff over there to the right. So this was quite a project. But as we see the next slide, this is a picture taken in Puelo after 1913, but before 1916. You can tell because it says Hilo Railway over there on the car on the right. This is a photograph taken of my wife's grandfather and a bunch of mostly Japanese Americans in Puelo. As I mentioned, the train became a tourist site. Now this is a 1920s picture. Look at the dresses of the women. You know, like they say, you can tell the rough age of a photograph by either women's clothing or automobiles. But this is about 1920s with those hats, and they're standing on a rock wall that goes straight down. So OSHA has not been around at that time. And as we mentioned earlier about the topography and safety rules and all like that, this is a 1923 photograph of engine number 15 crossing Honolulu Gulch. This is one of the steel bridges. You see the pylons that this is on. Now, the one reason why these are built so close to the ocean is because most of the mills were near the ocean. And the mills were near the ocean for two reasons. One, you could flume sugar cane down initially downhill to the mill if it's on the bottom. And the other one was before the train came, most of the sugar was transported via landings and block and tackle to boats offshore. So if they wanted to use the existing mill equipment with the train, they had to put the train very far mackay, and that's one reason that a lot of this had problems in the long run. The next picture, this is the Malua Trestle and Tunnel, 1924. You can see the entrance to the tunnel, which is over 1,000 feet long, on the far left. And you can see how high the trestle is. It's steel. Now, problem with it being steel, again, the prevailing winds are bringing salt water and salt air right at the bridge. But what's happened at this time is two trains didn't get their schedules correctly, and they ended up meeting on the trestle. No major damage because they could see each other at the time, but nonetheless, you get an idea of how big some of these bridges were. The next one, 1946, is this is Lapahoehoe trestle. You can see again it's very high, same steel architecture. And the next one, this is the near Waiakea. It's 1946, just before something happens, which we'll go in a minute. See how heavy these trains are and the kind of construction that they needed to do. It was quite outstanding. The next picture, as we mentioned earlier, they didn't always have enough passengers to have regular train service with a steam engine. What they would do later in the 20s is they would take a truck engine and modify it, change the wheels so it could ride on the tracks, and take smaller numbers of people into Hilo or out of Hilo. This is the Shipman Street and what was then French Street. That building behind it still exists in Hilo. Now, what happened was in 1946, unfortunately on April Fool's Day, a tsunami came into Hilo, killed a whole bunch of children at a school in Lapahoehoe, and it literally lifted this train right off the tracks. You can see all the debris and the fact that it's kapakahi there. So a lot of people died in this. This was much similar to the 1960 tsunami that occurred in Hilo also. The next picture shows what happened to one of the bridges over near the ocean. It's lost a good half of the bridge. That's just the track lying loose on the top. This is in Lapahoehoe. So the main way of getting around the Hamakua coast after 1946 basically was gone, or there were just a few really poor county roads that had existed even before the 1946 tsunami. What ended up happening, the next picture, a lot of the rolling stock of the plantation was basically marooned. This is one of the cabooses, or actually the passenger train section on one part, and then also you have area in the back, a door for cargo, multi-purpose building, or multi-purpose unit anyway, in Hilo. And so what ended up happening is a lot of these equipment pieces ended up going to the Philippines, Taiwan, and Central America, because what happened was the two groups of plantations in Hamakua had to make a decision after the tsunami. Would they rebuild the train, or would they go ahead and abandon the train? And they decided, at least the one that was in the Hilomo section, decided, because they were already using a lot of trucks within their operations within the plantation, they decided to go ahead and forego rebuilding the railway. And our last photograph for the day brings up what happened after the tsunami. What happened was that the county, or excuse me, the territory decided it was going to have to build roads when the trains decided to not operate any longer. They went ahead and sold all the plantation interests, and the railway sold all the steel that was part of these bridges, and a big company was coming in, getting ready to dismantle all these bridges and ship the steel off, mostly to Asia. Excuse me. But then the county realized that basically they would end up having to pay a lot more money to build a whole bunch of concrete bridges. So what they did was they turned around and spent $300,000 buying back more than 3 times what the steel was sold for to the scrapper to acquire the steel again, and they repurposed a bunch of the bridges. This is Lapahoihoi Park, and you're looking up there and you see that two sections of the bridge hanging upside down. That is part of the bridges from the Wailuku River outside Hilo were repurposed upside down for Lapahoihoi's bridges. Now what's happened in the last few years is that these steel bridges are continuing to be attacked by salt water, and so the state is slowly either reinforcing them with cement or replacing them completely with cement. And there are a number of bridges along the coast like this that are tall vestiges of the railway period and even from the 1950s architecture, road architecture, and they are all slowly being changed just because steel does not last in this kind of environment, and also because most of the engineers have been taught how to use concrete, not steel. So again, you can see that Hawaii has got a tremendous historical investment in railways. And they were really important to people. If your parents or grandparents lived on the Big Island or Kauai or whatever, chances are they would have taken the train frequently. We want to go ahead and have people understand the importance of this, and the importance of the to the plantations, the railways being what they were. And again, think about it. If you want to come out to our facility at Hawaiian Railway Society in Ewa, you're welcome to come ride our train and get the experience that your parents or grandparents may have had. Thank you for listening to our program, and we hope you have a good day. Thank you. Bye-bye.